What happens when a guitar god can't stand his fellow legends? Stay tuned. Tonight, we unveil the top 6 rock stars Eric Clapton hated the most. Some names will shock you. Some stories will change the way you hear classic albums forever. So buckle in, crank up your amp, and get ready to meet Clapton's most notorious foes. 6. Phil Collins. In the neon-lit world of 1980s rock, Eric Clapton's collaboration with Phil Collins marked a dramatic turning point in both artists' careers and in Clapton's sense of identity as a bluesman. In 1985, Clapton was coming off a lukewarm period, struggling with his new label's pressure to deliver blockbuster hits. Enter Phil Collins, a pop superstar and producer known for reinvigorating careers with his signature sound. The two joined forces for Clapton's Behind the Sun, recording at Air Studios in Montserrat and crafting tracks that mixed pop balladry with the grit of blues. From the start, tensions lingered beneath the surface. Clapton, whose heart beat for the blues, felt out of place amid Collins' glossy, radio-friendly arrangements. Despite their camaraderie as musicians, the album's direction quickly veered into territory Clapton wasn't comfortable with. The label rejected Collins' initial version of the album, wanting more hit material and pushing Clapton to record 3 new songs written by Jerry Lynn Williams: Forever Man, See What Love Can Do, and Something's Happening, in Los Angeles with a host of session musicians. The contrast was stark. Collins' tracks, which showcased tasteful keyboard lines and nuanced singing, clashed with the added commercialized elements lifted straight from the playbook of pop production. Backstage at the iconic Live Aid concert in July 1985, creative differences boiled over. Collins, enjoying massive success with Genesis and his solo work, wanted to drive the set lists with hooks and crowd-pleasing energy. Clapton, ever the purist, pushed hard for a raw blues feel. Arguments erupted, laying bare the tension between the allure of commercial triumph and the soul of blues tradition. Critics and fans noticed the rift too. Behind the Sun was slammed for its over-processed sound, and many accused Clapton of selling out. Yet the truth is more nuanced. Collins' influence was overstated, with many of the most commercial songs added at the label's demand, not due to Collins' choices. The partnership fizzled as Clapton retreated back into blues, determined to keep his music's essence alive. He later reflected, "People will say that Behind the Sun and August are really Phil Collins records. Fine, if that's all they can hear, they're not listening properly. I'm in there with as much as I got." The feud was more than personal. It was a clash of artistic philosophies. Collins continued topping charts. Clapton rediscovered his roots. 5. Ginger Baker. If you think band breakups are messy, you haven't heard the Cream saga. Eric Clapton and drummer Ginger Baker formed one of rock's early supergroups, but from day one, their relationship was explosive. The drama actually began even before Cream's first rehearsal. Ginger Baker envisioned forming the biggest pop group in the world and wanted Clapton on board, impressed by Clapton's virtuosity in the blues scene. Clapton agreed, but with one caveat: that bassist Jack Bruce joined the band. Unbeknownst to Clapton, Bruce and Baker had a near-toxic history. Baker had once threatened Bruce with a knife when they played together in the Graham Bond organization. Baker couldn't stand Bruce, but his excitement over working with Clapton overruled his doubts, at the expense of peace. Right from the start, the three-way chemistry was explosive. Baker's percussive style clashed with Bruce's assertiveness, leaving Clapton, famously reserved, caught in the middle. What happened backstage was legendary. Arguments erupted over everything from song structure to stage volume, with amp stacks growing into mountainous noisemakers. Baker recalled that Cream's last year was extremely painful, remarking that by 1968, sheer volume had damaged his hearing permanently. The constant bickering forced Clapton to become an unwanted peacekeeper. And it wasn't just musical differences. It was ego, personality, and deep-seated rivalry. As the band toured relentlessly, the tension became unbearable. Baker accused Clapton of sacrificing sound for sales, calling him a sellout. Clapton, in turn, viewed Baker as erratic and increasingly impossible to work with. There were moments when Clapton reportedly told a roadie, "Either he goes or I go," highlighting just how close the group came to open collapse. Bruce and Baker, meanwhile, could barely tolerate being in the same room, forcing studio engineers to keep them apart during recording sessions. On the band's legendary 1968 farewell tour, things fell apart completely. The trio often demanded to play separately, and the bitter atmosphere overshadowed their musical brilliance. Baker would later boast, "Eric was scared of me. He knew I was the better musician." The animosity lingered for decades. Clapton routinely refused Cream reunions if Baker was involved, and their brief 2005 reunion was described as cordial at best. Oddly, this creative rivalry was both curse and blessing. For all their animosity, Baker and Clapton created rock's most enduring masterpieces, fueled by the very energy of their conflict. Songs like White Room, Crossroads, and Sunshine of Your Love explode with improvisational fire, proof that even deep personal discord can spark pure artistic greatness. Yet the cost was real, the friendship never recovered, and Cream's short lifespan became a rock legend, a cautionary tale of ego, genius, and the price of ambition. As the amps faded and the band split, the rock world was left to wonder. How can two artists despise each other so much, yet make music that shaped the very DNA of rock? Would Cream's magic have existed without the volatility of Baker and Clapton's battles? That's the paradox of creative rivalry. Behind the unforgettable sound, a storm always brewed, a storm that ultimately proved impossible to tame. Czwarty Frank Zappa. Slide into the world of avant-garde. Clapton versus Frank Zappa. Their clash was more than personal. It was a battle of musical philosophy that exposed the divide between blues tradition and avant-garde experimentation. Frank Zappa, celebrated for his boundary-pushing, satirical approach, had little use for Clapton's devotion to the blues. Zappa famously derided Clapton's guitar style as predictable blues noodling, declaring in a biting 1978 Rolling Stone interview, "Eric Clapton is a safe guitar player. He plays the same thing over and over. There's no danger, no risk, no art." These comments cut deep, as Clapton's entire career was rooted in raw emotion, authenticity, and the purity of the blues. Clapton, never shy about defending his turf, fired back through music journalist friends, saying, "Frank Zappa wouldn't know real music if it bit him. All his experiments are just noise, hiding his inability to play real rock and roll." The conflict wasn't only about notes and scales, it was a collision of tradition and rebellion. Zappa saw himself as a revolutionary, striving to dismantle musical norms and inject chaos, humor, and unpredictability into the scene. To Clapton, this was a betrayal of what truly moves audiences. He found Zappa's work pretentious and unlistenable. The feud intensified at the 1969 Love and Peace Festival, where both performed. Zappa, ever the provocateur, reportedly insisted on playing his wild, experimental set immediately before Clapton's more restrained blues performance, challenging, "Let's see him follow that." Backstage, the tension was palpable, with Zappa relishing the chance to mock Clapton's style, not just in interviews, but right in the thick of performance settings. Clapton, privately enraged, refused to take the bait publicly, but those close to him recalled how he seethed at what he saw as Zappa's deliberate provocation. Their animosity played out time and again, with Zappa continuing to joke about Clapton's pentatonic exercises, and Clapton doubling down on his dislike for Zappa's noise. Even after Zappa's death in 1993, Clapton remained silent on the subject, allegedly telling friends, "I have nothing to say about him that wouldn't be inappropriate." The feud was never resolved, a cold war that mirrored the larger split in rock between the keepers of tradition and the breakers of boundaries. Ultimately, the rivalry between Eric Clapton and Frank Zappa was about more than two big personalities. It was the story of rock's internal struggle. Are you drawn to the roots and emotion of the blues, or do you crave the innovation and irreverence of avant-garde chaos? With these legends, the battle lines have been drawn for decades. 3. Keith Richards. Take a deep breath. This feud gets personal. Clapton's lifelong rivalry with Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards burned with jealousy, betrayal, and some ugly public spats. At the heart of their conflict lies a deeply personal story, a love triangle involving George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. Clapton famously fell in love with and eventually married Boyd, who had previously been married to Harrison, his close friend in the Beatles. This act of stealing the woman from a friend sparked deep resentment from Richards, who was fiercely protective of Harrison. Richards publicly condemned Clapton's actions, calling it a snake move that revealed Clapton's true colors. The wound was not only personal, but laid the foundation for their fraught relationship. Musically, the two could not have been more different. Clapton, a technically precise blues virtuoso, often mocked Richards' rough and swaggering style, considering it sloppy and unrefined. On the other hand, Richards dismissed Clapton as boring, accusing him of playing the same sad blues for years. This musical rivalry was as much about conflicting identities as it was about sound. Clapton symbolized the refined technical mastery of blues guitar, while Richards embodied a raw, instinctive rock and roll spirit. The feud reached new heights in the 1970s during the dark years when both musicians struggled with substance abuse. Their animosity played out publicly, with Richards accusing Clapton of hiding behind heroin addiction, while Clapton retorted by mocking Richards' musical repertoire, saying he played just 5 riffs for 2 decades. This period saw their rivalry spill beyond music into their personal and professional lives. The tension was so severe that Clapton reportedly refused to participate in any musical project involving Richards. Friends and colleagues had to go to great lengths to keep the two apart at parties and social functions, aware that their volatile interaction could easily trigger conflicts. Even record labels deliberately avoided putting them together on compilations or joint projects, fearing ego clashes and public fallout. This rivalry was not merely competitive, it was rooted in betrayal and a clash of core values: personal loyalty, artistic integrity, and identity. Richards' protective loyalty to Harrison, Clapton's technical brilliance and perceived coldness, and the betrayal involving Boyd created a volatile mix that resonated for decades. Despite occasional public shows of camaraderie, the tension between these two guitar legends remained palpable. Would you be willing to confront an old friend over love and artistic pride? The story of Clapton and Richards shows rock and roll's darker side, where personal grievances become inseparable from musical rivalry, and where friendship and enmity can coexist in the same breath, shaping some of the most enduring chapters in music history. 2. Jimmy Page. Now we light up the main stage. Clapton versus Led Zeppelin's Jimmy Page. Their relationship began in the early 1960s, within London's tightly knit blues and rock community. Both were session musicians and members of the Yardbirds, though not concurrently. Clapton's departure from the band in 1965 paved the way for Page's entry, with Clapton recommending Page to replace him. Despite this, they frequently jammed together and recorded blues sessions, nurturing an initially friendly and respectful connection. However, their camaraderie eventually gave way to rivalry. Page, known for his innovative and experimental style, privately teased Clapton's playing as one-dimensional, implying Clapton stayed rooted in traditional blues without pushing boundaries. Meanwhile, Clapton, a dedicated blues purist, was skeptical of Page's approach, often mocking what he termed Page's studio tricks and challenging him to prove his prowess in live performances. The rivalry intensified as Led Zeppelin's explosive success contrasted with Clapton's trajectory. Page's transformation of the Yardbirds into Led Zeppelin marked a new musical force that eclipsed Clapton's influence with Cream and his solo work. One particular source of bitterness was a contentious issue involving tapes of early blues recordings that Page and Clapton had made together. Manager Andrew Loog Oldham pressured Page to hand over these tapes, which led to overdubs featuring members of the Rolling Stones and their commercial release without Clapton's approval. This move severely damaged Clapton's trust in Page and contributed to a fallout between them. Despite their cooler relationship, the two guitarists occasionally shared the stage over the years, such as at the 1983 Ronnie Lane benefit concert, where fans hoped for reconciliation. On stage, they displayed professionalism and respect for each other's talents, blending Clapton's smooth blues style with Page's heavier rock edge. Yet, behind the scenes, unresolved issues and lingering tension remained. In interviews, Page has expressed admiration for Clapton, including listing him among his favorite guitarists. Still, subtle jabs and rivalry persisted, framing their relationship as a perpetual battle for recognition and dominance in the pantheon of the guitar greats. Ultimately, Clapton versus Page was a clash between tradition and innovation, between the refined blues craftsman and the bold rock experimenter. While neither definitively came out on top, their rivalry fueled the evolution of rock music, leaving a legacy marked by both friendship and competitive fire. Would you say Clapton was chasing Page's shadow, or were they simply two different sides of the same coin in British rock history? The story of their feud is a testament to how rivalry can shape and define legendary careers. First, Jimi Hendrix, and finally the rivalry that nearly broke Clapton. You guessed it, Jimi Hendrix. The story begins in October 1966, shortly after Hendrix arrived in London. Then an unknown American guitarist, Hendrix was introduced to Clapton by mutual friends and invited to join Cream for an impromptu jam session at the Regent Street Polytechnic. What happened on stage that night is the stuff of rock folklore. Hendrix unleashed a performance so fiery and inventive that it left the audience, and Clapton himself, utterly stunned. Clapton, who had been at the very peak of Britain's guitar hierarchy, reportedly walked off the stage muttering in disbelief. "You never told me he was that bloody good." That night sparked an unspoken war. Hendrix's style was wild, unpredictable, and revolutionary, stretching the electric guitar's possibilities beyond anything Clapton or his contemporaries had imagined. Effects pedals, feedback manipulation, unconventional chord voicings, Hendrix turned them into weapons of pure expression. Clapton, ever the blues purist, found himself both fascinated and threatened. Publicly, he dismissed Hendrix's theatrics as showmanship. Privately, he studied recordings, dissecting Hendrix's techniques and incorporating some into his own playing. The rivalry wasn't without its pettiness. Clapton was known to downplay Hendrix's musicality in interviews, calling some of his work self-indulgent noise, while Hendrix, with his usual cool wit, would gently mock Clapton's slow-hand sobriquet and predictable blues phrasing. Friends recall a competitiveness that simmered beneath polite exchanges, each measuring himself against the other. Yet, despite all the tension, there was a strange thread of mutual respect. Clapton recognized Hendrix as a once-in-a-lifetime talent, someone who had permanently raised the bar. Hendrix, in turn, admired Clapton's tone and technical control, even if their philosophies diverged. When Hendrix died tragically in September 1970 at just 27, the news hit Clapton hard, but not in the way people expected. Publicly, he offered no comment, staying silent in interviews. Privately, he admitted feeling a disorienting mix of grief and relief. With Hendrix gone, the constant pressure of living in his shadow had lifted, but so had a source of creative fuel and challenge. From personal betrayals to fierce musical duels, each feud pushed Clapton to evolve, sometimes in defiance of his rivals and other times because of them. Some challenged his pride, others questioned his artistry, and a few downright changed the course of his career. Whether it was Hendrix's revolutionary guitar style, Richard's biting criticisms, or Ginger Baker's fiery confrontations, these conflicts revealed a side of Clapton far removed from smooth blues licks, a man constantly defending his musical identity. Which rivalry left your jaw on the floor? Do you think these enemies secretly helped cement Clapton's place as a rock legend? Share your wildest Clapton stories below and keep the rock drama alive.